It's a really important number to know. You want it to be one number because it makes things simple. But in actuality, it's a lot more complicated and sort of nuanced than that. Not all customers are created equal. Hey, what's up, everybody? And welcome to Growth Mentors, the podcast where we share snackable growth hacks, strategies, and best practices in how to drive maximum marketing impact and grow your bottom line. I'm your host, Matt LeBlanc, and today we are going to be talking about a tricky little metric that is often misunderstood. It is lifetime value, or LTV. And here to walk us through it is the Managing Director of Data and Analytics at Jump 450, Tom Murray. Tom, let's start off with a couple of definitions, a little bit of context on this topic, starting with LTV, lifetime value. Give us a simple definition of LTV.
LTV is the lifetime value of a customer, as you said, but it's usually calculated as taking the total amount of revenue over a specific time frame divided by a specific number of customers over said time frame. So you're kind of tracking people over time to see how much they spend to figure out how much that user is worth.
And Tom, what about CAC? CAC, simple definition for CAC.
So CAC is just cost per acquiring a new customer. So that's usually going to be your total spend divided by the number of new customers over a specific time frame.
Okay. And lastly, cohort.
Cohort is what I talked about with the time frames of both of those metrics. So usually if the group users into specific buckets, usually it's by time frame. You can group them, as you'll see in some of the examples we'll go through later. There's different ways to cohort, but the most frequent one is by time period. So usually by month. So in the month of January 2024, how many new customers did we acquire, regardless of any ad source or attribution, but just how many new customers did we bring in this month would be a cohorted number. And that way we can then track those same 1,000 people over time, over the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months or longer to get that lifetime value by tracking the sales and the revenue for those 1,000 people over time to say, hey, you know what, those 1,000 people spent $1 million in their first order. It's a $1,000 AOV, quite nice. But then over time, they're going to rebuy things. So we can then track them by cohorting them into the different buckets. That's important because if you don't cohort, all the things we're about to talk about isn't possible.
I see. So going back to LTV, lifetime value, what is the basic issue? What is the basic thing that people get wrong about an LTV?
So everyone wants an LTV. That's what everyone wants. The problem is a couple things. One, you need enough data to get a good lifetime value. And that's going to be different for every person because you're depending on your product you sell, right? Let's say you sell mattresses. Well, chances are I'm going to buy a mattress and I'm not going to buy another mattress for maybe 5 years, 10 years. So the lifetime value is probably what you spend on that first order. Whereas if you're like a vitamin brand and you sell 30-day packs of vitamins, well, your lifetime value may take a short amount of time to figure out, or if you get a lot of recurring customers, you might be able to figure out the lifetime value after 3, 6, 12 months. Right, so first it's product dependent. The other problem though is you need enough data to then see a lifetime value. You can't just do it for 1 month in a cohort, like I said before, and then just say my lifetime value is X. You want a few different months of it. And then there's seasonality issues with it too, right? Your LTV for cohorted users from November may be different from May because you're running different sales in November for Black Friday. You're getting new customers that have no idea who you are, but they're buying as a gift, right? So some of the cohorts you might see are gift buyers versus non-gift buyers. Chances are gift buyer, it can go one of two ways. Gift buyers can either spend a lot of money because they're trying to buy for a bunch of different people.
Right.
Whereas if you buy for yourself, well, you're only buying for one person. So you don't need 5 sets of pots and pans. But if I'm buying 5 gifts for 5 different people, I could buy more pots and pans. So sometimes gift buyers are actually more valuable. And sometimes they're less valuable because they're only buying one thing for that one specific person randomly and they never come back. Right. So that's a way you can cohort people differently based on their behavior. But most of the time it's cohorted on the month level. The problem though is that everyone wants that one number to then go for because it's easy. Well, my LTV is 200. Now I know how much I could spend to get somebody. Because oftentimes what people do is they try and figure out an LTV to CAC ratio, right? Which is simply, let's say my LTV is 180 and my CAC is 60. That means my LTV to CAC ratio is 3 to 1. That's what a lot of people just generally try and aim for.
Right.
The problem with that is that every business is different, right? Some businesses have margins of 80%. If you sell shampoo or lotions in skincare, the margins are insanely high because you can batch everything and mass produce things. But if you're selling something like, I don't know, like a chandelier or something that's really heavy and expensive with high quality materials, your margin might be much lower. So you need different LTV to CACs, but everyone likes to say, oh, you just need a 3-to-1, right? Or which doesn't apply to every business, right? So everyone wants a number, but it really has to be business dependent. And then the last piece is that not every person is created equal, right? So like certain LTVs are going to be different depending on those users we talked about. So that's why you can't just have one. Because if you have one, you're totally discounting the fact that not everyone who buys from you is the same person. Right. Everyone has different reasons and behaviors.
Right. So just to put a point on it, that really is kind of the issue that a lot of people have with lifetime value, is that it's a really important number to know. You want it to be one number because it makes things simple. But in actuality, it's a lot more complicated and sort of nuanced than that. Not all customers are created equal. There are a lot of different factors that are determining somebody's LTV. And so basically, even though you want it to be one number, it's just not. True?
True. And then it's also, how long do you want to track somebody for? So a lot of brands would love to have an LTV, but they might have 3 to 5 years to wait to understand what that is, right? So a lot of people have like a 6-month LTV or a 12-month or an 18-month to give them some level of earlier signal than what the true LTV is over, the true lifetime, right? So lifetime usually doesn't mean full lifetime. The problem with that though is let's say you have a 6-month LTV. Some people use 90 days as like the lowest amount.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you have like a monthly subscription, you could do that. Because a lot of times people don't repurchase that frequently. But let's assume it's like a vitamin supplement you're buying every 30 days for yourself, right? So you could use a 90-day LTV. The problem with even 90 days means to understand how that month went, you physically need to wait 90 days.
Right.
Which a lot of people want to optimize at the moment, on the day. Like we have some clients that are like, hey, this today looks really good. Push the budgets up. Tomorrow it could be things look really bad. Push the budgets down. But you're not waiting 3 months to understand if it's doing well or not, right? And there's predictive analytics. Shopify now has cohorted dashboards for lifetime value where they can predict out your lifetime value.
Yeah.
It's a prediction, so it's a coin flip. You never know if it's going to be good or not. So you either have to trust it or wait. And a lot of brands don't want to wait, right? But I think of LTV as, it's not the only measurement you use, but it's another tool in your tool belt, but it just takes longer, right? Certain measurements you can get in the moment. Pixel level data, your site level data, your sales. Those you see in real time, you can act on that. And then there's this LTV data that you act on not as frequently, but to make bigger shifts in maybe strategy and tactics once you have more data across multiple months, right? The last thing you want to do is look at one number for one random month and just go with that for the next 10 years because there's so many caveats with just using one number. So you need to track LTVs over a long period of time to see how they blend over seasonality and discounts and sale events and things like that to really get a better sense of it.
Tom, in your experience, when you say that there are tools, Shopify, you said has a way to sort of make predictions for LTV. How accurate are these predictions in your estimation?
It's brand new. Like it came out like within the last couple of weeks. So your guess is as good as mine.
Right. So I'm going to go on a limb and say not very. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. Maybe they're really accurate, but good to know that they're brand new. So Tom, why don't you give us an example of this? You had a really good example about food kits that I wanted to talk through here. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a good example of how brands have evolved over time, because I'm going to take it back all the way to like when everyone was getting ads for HelloFresh, Blue Apron. Mm-hmm. People still get those ads now for a lot of factor ads and things like that. So there's now even more food kits, but originally back, maybe like 5-10 years ago, it's really Blue Apron versus HelloFresh.
Right.
And the key thing there is they always try to give you a discount right away. And a lot of people will fight and say, hey, if you give someone a discount, they're never going to be worth as much because they're primed. And which means like they're used to a discount. They're going to always need a discount. They're going to churn. Usually that's the case, honestly. But like there are cases where that's not always the case. But in the food kit wars, if you will, between the two brands, you would see first box free, which if you've ever gotten one of those boxes, there's usually like $100, right? So it's a really good offer. The problem is as they ran more LTV analysis is internally for those brands, is that they found that the people that came in on that first promo discount of a full free box had a way worse LTV than those that didn't, which makes sense. If you spend $100 on something, you're more likely to care more about it versus somebody you got it for free, right? So that's not crazy to think about. What was crazy was the biggest drop off that did happen, where if you saw this on a chart, it was like immediately down where they barely reordered a second time.
Right.
Which is the problem, right? So you get a lot of churn and burn, as you would call it, which
people
means
are just signing up for their free $100 box.
And they leave. And then they go to their competitor, get another free box. The next thing you know, they got 2 months of free food. And then, the third month you figure it out.
Yeah, then they go back to Trader Joe's and eating microwavable.
Right. Dinners. Or now at this point, now you could just switch to every single one. Right.
Right.
But then they at least realize that and pivot it. Some brands would see the LTV and combine those two. But in reality, the LTV of that discount user versus non-discount user was like 4x higher. So people that came in on a discount were worth 4 times less, or people that didn't use the discount were worth 4 times more. So the goal is how do we get more people like that? Well, it's tough because you're trying to get someone to spend $100 on food they've never tried before, right? So at a certain point, they realize they had to switch up their game, right? So now a lot of times it's like, hey, you'll get $100 off, but it's $25 off of your first 4 orders. Because there's been a lot of studies that show after about purchase 3 or 4, regardless of the product, you start to become more loyal to it because you've built habits, right? So if you're physically reordering everything 4 times, that's at least 4 weeks of you doing that versus one box.
So same money off, but you're creating a habit.
Right. So you create the habit, and then that improves the LTV. Even though it's on a discount, they were spending more per visit in the first part because they're, instead of spending 0 and then 100, they're spending 75, 75, 75, 75
right.
because they got $25 off each one.
Right.
Now, in both cases, they spent $300, but it's how it was distributed, right? And that LTV improved, right? They still had issues. If you go look at Blue Apron stock price over the years, and you'll see they've had their trials and tribulations. So I'm not saying that's a perfect strategy, but they did realize at least that they couldn't just discount. So they had to pivot their strategy. And this is what I mean by once you have a lot of data in place, you can then change your strategy and tactics based on that to try and improve that. It's not something that happens overnight, but you can see that and say, I need to make a change for the business. So it's a more business level change versus, I'm going to run this ad versus ad. In the case of, Blue Apron and HelloFresh, discounts are just one of the types of different users. Then you could say you could have co-ordered people that bought steaks on the first orders versus not. Like you could have chopped up the LTV in a bunch of different ways if you had that data, right? Which you probably would have that data to say, hey, if I know this person ordered, I probably also know what they order. And then they probably also found people that ordered certain products had better LTV. So then what do you do then? Well, then you promote your first order boxes with your creative. Since now you're on the creative side, you probably put those products in the creative. Right? Because clearly that's getting people to rebuy in the future. So lead with that, right? HelloFresh, if you go on the catalog, they have Italian, they have Asian food, they have Mexican food, they have all these types of food. Which one do you pick for the ad? Well, go find out what's actually selling the best and what is getting people to rebuy. Put that in the ad, right? So you can use something like an LTV analysis at a more macro level. And even though I just said you wouldn't use it for ad A and B, there are cases where you may actually want to change up your strategy. Right? That could be the creative level. Or maybe you have a landing page that is geared towards more steaks versus vegetables, whatever it might be. You could also probably assume that a steak dinner from like a HelloFresh versus the person that just eats the vegetables, the steak one's probably more expensive. So if they can get somebody to buy steak and then buy it more frequently, they're probably having a higher gross value in general. The steak probably costs more too, so the margins might be different, but that's where you have to know the business to understand, okay, I may make more money here, but I'm actually losing more because the steaks are more expensive than the vegetables. Who knows, right? Like that's for them to decide. But these are ways that you take marketing data, mix with your business data to actually figure out what's the optimal way to price this, what should I be promoting, right? Because if you were making ads, I mean, we had a food kit brand that you were on years ago, right?
Yep.
How could you figure out which one to feature, right? You were probably like, oh, these are the most popular ones, or the clients are like, we want to focus on these. If it was me, I would have been like, hey, let's see what the data says. Yep. They didn't have that kind of data, so we couldn't do that. But like in a perfect world, we would know which are the best sellers, what are the highest LTVs, and only promote those, get those in. And then you could sell them all the other things. Right. So you could use this for both tactical, but also higher level strategy decisions too.
Right. So Tom, just to sort of take us back to the beginning here, everybody wants that single number LTV, but as we've sort of found out here, not all LTVs are created equal, which is why we really have to sort of get more into the weeds in that. Promotions, in the case of food kits, are one thing that affect these different LTVs. Can you give us another example of maybe the reason that a company would need to be paying attention to more than one lifetime value?
So this is probably an easier example than the food kit one. So if you understood the food kit one, this one should be easier. But let's say you're an e-commerce product, right? Oftentimes, like I said, there's people that churn and burn. So a lot of people just buy one time. On average, an e-commerce store repeat rate will be anywhere from 20 to 25%. So 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4 people tend to repurchase at some point in time in the future. That means 75 to 80% of people buy once and never come back, right? Very simple math. Now, if my LTV for a client is like $200, well, if my average order value is, say, $75, keep it simple. That means my first-time purchasers are only worth $75. But if my overall LTV is 200, that means my people that buy more than once have to be worth like $300, $400 because they're buying multiple times. So like counteract the fact that 3 out of every 4 people are only spending $75, right? So if my LTV is 200 and I've got 3 people spending 75, that's only 225. To get to 200, I need somebody else to buy a bunch of products, right? For a lot of money. So this isn't news, right? Obviously, somebody who buys multiple times is worth more than somebody who buys once. The problem is how people focus their ads and they focus their efforts. Yeah. So oftentimes, historically, people have focused on new customer growth. That's what all the investors wanted. Problem is, people now apparently want profit. Who knew that making money in a business was actually what people wanted all along, right? It seems like a crazy idea. So everyone focused on new customer growth, which means they didn't care what the LTV was. They didn't care what the churn and burn rate was. So they didn't care if their repeat rate was only 10%. They just cared that they kept growing new customers. And this would be called engineering growth, where it's like they could have $100 million in funding. And that means they could spend $5 million on ads, but they wouldn't. They'd spend $200,000 on ads and get this many customers. Next month, they spend $400,000 and get twice the amount of people. Then they spend a little bit more and you start engineering the growth to look like it's going up. Right? So you're controlling the level of growth based on how you're spending. If you turn the spigot on and you tripled your spend, you'd probably get more customers too, hopefully. So there was a lot of that going on. But in reality, no one cared about the LTV. But to care about profit, you need to understand the LTV because you need to know how much can I actually acquire a customer for, right? So there's a tactic shift at that point where it's like, yes, new customers are important, but new customers are getting more and more expensive to find every day. There's more competition on ad platforms. You're not just competing against your competitors. If I sell golf shirts, I'm not competing only against people that sell golf shirts. I'm also competing for that same male 35 years old that P&G is trying to sell a razor to that has $1 billion to spend. So you're also competing against like an ice cream shop in your same town because they're targeting people in your town. And there's a lot of small businesses on Facebook that keep growing, right? There's millions of small businesses that you're actually competing against, even though you don't think of them as competitors, on all the platforms. So now all the costs are going up because the amount of ad space is not going up, right? So all my costs are going up, which means to acquire somebody new, it's costing me more than it used to.
Right.
The only way to make that up is either get the cost down or squeeze more out of the people that have already bought from me. So if I can make more money on the repeat purchases, I'm going to have a better chance of breaking even, at least on the customer acquisition side, because most people's CACs a lot of times are higher than the first-time order AOV. So a lot of people aren't first-order profitable, but if they have enough cash flow, they can make it work if people are repurchasing at high rates. So that's where it's business dependent, right? If you have a lot of money coming in, but over time, you might be able to sustain a lot of one-time purchases, but most people can't, So because of that, you need to actually focus your strategy. Again, changing the strategy from new customer growth to retention. How do we make sure we're getting those people who've bought once? How do we get them to buy the second time?
Right.
How do we get someone who bought 2 times to 3 or 4 times? Because we know 3 or 4 makes loyal. So how can we change up our messaging to those people?
Yeah.
Some of that's through ads, specific audiences that you might target. Like, hey, I know these people have only bought once. I'm going to send them a specific ad, send them with a specific budget in mind. Or I send them different emails. I personalize things a little bit. Right? There's so many different things you could do on the tactic side. Again, just from seeing the LTV, you could change your tactics and your strategy over long periods of time because once you get these people to these groups, your LTVs are way, way higher, which then allow you to spend more to get new customers and hope they also become repeat purchasers because you're starting to create a loop. If you know it works to get people from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, well, then you can then use that for all the new people you start bringing in, which you didn't have before. So they all work together. And if you can master one side, adds to the third, but it is a lot harder than it sounds.
Yeah, Tom, I feel like this is a great place to highlight this. Initially when you and I were sort of beating out this conversation, we got to this place and it really seemed to me like you were recommending retargeting, right? taking care of the people that are sort of not necessarily, oh, well, I guess they're in consideration, right? They've already purchased once. We're trying to get them to repeat purchasing, right? My question for you was, are you recommending retargeting here? Because we've covered this before, that you believe that everybody spends too much on retargeting. And I thought that the answer that you gave was thoughtful and a good one for people to think about, which is, what are the other ways that you can sort of nurture those standing customers that you have that are not through running retargeting ads? One of the examples that you gave was, sending a different email to those people that are in, at that phase of their customer journey, or, being aware of, well, this person has already purchased this. We're not going to email them every day about this. It's going to be a more thoughtful approach. Or I thought that the really sort of like specific or macro example that you gave was like when a CEO actually calls a customer and says, "Hey, I noticed that you ordered X amount of this," and sort of makes that personal touch point. That's probably an extreme example, but it's like it's these other tactics that you can sort of use to kind of nurture those repeat customers.
Yeah, and you could still retarget to a point, right? But the whole point is, how do you be more thoughtful about it, right? So if I know certain people have already bought, I could send them very specific finding messages, not in a creepy way, but enough that they're not getting the same email. Most people neglect their retargeting list or their purchase list, right? Yeah, and you could still retarget to a point, right? But the whole point is, how do you be more thoughtful about it, right? So if I know certain people have already bought, I could send them very specific finding messages, not in a creepy way, but enough that they're not getting the same email. Most people neglect their...
So it's thinking of more thoughtful ways to sort of nurture the customers that are already in the consideration phase outside of just, hitting them with retargeting ads.
Yeah, and you could still retarget to a point, right? But the whole point is, how do you be more thoughtful about it, right? So if I know certain people have already bought, I could send them very specific finding messages, not in a creepy way, but enough that they're not getting the same email. Most people neglect their retargeting list or their purchase list, right? It's quite easy to send every single person the same email. But that's not an optimal approach, right? It's very time-consuming to do a more optimal approach. And look, we don't even do email marketing. Like, that's not a service that we generally provide, but even then, we can still help consult on some of those things, right? So, like, I know I get blasted with emails from plenty of sites during Black Friday, and just like a mishmash of random things. I'll get 6 emails a day. That's never going to stop, because you'll never like get out of the inbox if you don't send them any. But when you're not in a crazy sale time, right, and you can try and re-engage somebody, there's special ways to do it. But just sending them the same emails that everybody usually isn't the way, right? You can make them feel special, send, different texts that make it seem like they're an insider or something like that. To a lot of brands do Facebook groups for specific people. They invite you in there, so it's just the community of people. Mm-hmm. That's an easy one. That's free. Just make it a Facebook group and let everyone else talk about your products. It makes it very simple. Then you find who are your best advocates, and then they're probably doing word of mouth on the Facebook group, but then they could do word of mouth outside. They could maybe make ads for you. You can use them as creators, right? They already have your product. Say, hey, would you be willing to make a script, right? Or not make a script. We'll make you the script and you film it.
Sure.
Because customer testimonials are great, especially from the real hardcore people. You could see that because they're the ones commenting all the time. Like, there's some Facebook groups for some brands we have that have tens of thousands of people in them.
Right.
And they're just talking all day about this one random product. And you're like, you have way too much time in your hands. But those are the kind of people you want to try and activate. And then if you call them up, like you said, like that's obviously for a more small brand. Like P&G is not going to call up every person that buys Tide, right? But if you sell, hundreds of products a month or thousands of products a month, you can easily make a report to say, who are my top customers? It takes like 30 seconds to pull it. And you could at least email them all or send them a special note in the mail. There's services that even can make handwritten notes for you, right? Like, it's well worth the time if these people are spending thousands of dollars with you. So you can get very custom with the retention piece, which is important because everyone they forget about it. Everyone's been so laser focused on new customer acquisition that they assume their product is the best and that nobody has a product like me, right? So for example, a lot of mattresses, Casper, Tuft and Needle, Nectar, all of them, they're all the same mattress. Different logo, different box, likely the same factory. No differentiation. between them. So it's very easy. Maybe not a mattress because I'm not going to switch as frequently, but that's always the one that's top of mind of like, they're the same thing, right? No different than a lot of the stuff you buy at a store, the socks, like Nike and Under Armour socks, probably the same in the reality, just different logos, right? So it makes it very easy for someone to switch away from you because you're not selling something that's very differentiated. You're not making them feel like I'm a part of an exclusive club that I want to go venture. Because believe it or not, a lot of people are not that brand loyal. Maybe to a few brands you use. Yeah. But there are very few things that people will not buy if another option that's similar is not there, right? So like if I'm going to a store that sells both Nike and Under Armour socks, I'm in the market for socks, which is why I stop buying. But like if I go to a store and they don't have any Nike socks, I could probably go buy the Under Armour socks and be fine. Right. There's not many brands where I'm like, I'm going to leave that store without any socks, But if I always get this very special custom nurturing sequence of that, it can make me loyal. And those are the people you need to keep. Because if you don't keep those people, there is no chance of success because you're churning and burning too many other people, right? So you can't forget about those 25 to 30% of people that are actually giving you money and being like, my product's so good, they're just going to rebuy again. They probably won't because they forget, right? So a good example, one of my friends, he was running a hair care brand and he had just this whole email list. There was like hundreds of thousands of people. And he's like, they just haven't come back. I'm like, have you sent them anything ever? He's like, oh, we send our blanket mass email. I'm like, well, chances are not everyone's seeing it or it's going into spam or whatever. I'm like, why don't you just segment out the people that have bought 3+ times and who haven't bought in 6 months? He did that in a weekend and he made like 50 grand from people that were not going to plan to buy because they haven't bought in so long, but they used to buy and they just forgot about you, right? Like that's very common. Like we have a million things going on every day. Sometimes you just need a reminder. And he made it very special, like, oh, hey, you're a best customer group, or give me a VIP offer, whatever. And within 2 days, 50 grand. Like that's simple, right? It's not always as easy as that, but just doing some special nurturing can help you improve the LTV on that side. Because if you don't have really good LTV on the repeat purchases, with CACs going up and costs going up, you won't be able to counteract it. And it's going to become like a capsizing ship. And it has for a lot of brands. Yep. Right? A lot of brands have gone under the last couple of years, especially with COVID and things like that, because they didn't have that unlock. They just were getting new customers and then they kept losing them all because they went somewhere else or they were too expensive. So you got to really figure out how you keep them. It's a lot easier to get somebody who's already spent money with you to spend more than to get somebody new to spend any money with you.
Tom, that is a great point to leave us with. Just to go over a couple of takeaways here, I feel like single number LTVs are a myth. You need to look deeper than that because there are several things that are going to be affecting that LTV number. And also, you need to look at your repeat customers. That retention phase is going to be a really impactful place to get creative with your efforts. How are you turning a one-time purchaser into a repeat purchaser? Tom, thank you for all of the insight today. And if you are listening and you are interested in exploding your digital growth, you can get in touch with Jump 450 in the link below in the description. That is www.jump450.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more weekly episodes. We'll see you next time.